Mark Nordenberg, Laura Ellsworth, co-chairs of the summit. Laura, describe for me the genesis. How did this take off?
Within days after the shootings on 10/27, we began to think about, Mark and I, how we could convert what happened here, the tragedy that happened here, into something that was powerful and a force that would combat hate everywhere, not just here, but around the world.
And how long did it take for that idea, that concept, to morph into what we have seen here?
2.5 years.
It took that long for the concept to become a reality, but I have to say, I think it was in Laura's mind all the time that it was going to be the biggest and best anti-hate conference in the world. And she, in particular, has worked without any rest to get that done over the last 2.5 years.
Everyone we have talked to has said what sets this summit apart from others they might have attended is the bringing together of like-minded people who are trying to combat hate-fueled extremism. Was that part of the original concept, bring all the groups together?
Part of what we knew from the work that we'd done at Jones Day around the world on hate crimes is that there were amazing people in different kinds of fields working on hate, but they weren't talking to one another. They weren't sharing ideas. And so one of the most important parts of the conference was to bring those people together in person, in the same room, so that those ideas would cross-pollinate, that those relationships would be created, those working relationships. And it wasn't just like-minded people, it was people of unlike mind, people who brought diverse issues to the table. Because one of the things Mark and I share is that we're both trained trial lawyers. We are both people who have devoted our lives to the adversary system and the conviction that even opposing voices, argued hard, often produce the greatest truth, which is usually somewhere in between.
Intellectual expansion occurs through disagreement rather than alignment.
And critical thinking.
And one organizational feature of the conference that you may have noticed is we've got large numbers of people sharing ideas for a relatively brief period of time. That is, we did not want to have people come in and speak for an hour and pass the baton to someone else who was going to take an hour. The judgment that was made instead was, let's get as many people together as possible, let them share some basic ideas, and then we'll see how we can bring them together in a more serious way to do work in between conferences.
Another element that seems to set this summit apart from many other similar sorts of gatherings is the idea that when people leave, you want the conference to leave with them. You want, in other words, they're not going to simply leave and forget about it.
They're not going to forget about the conference, and we also expect they won't forget about the people they've met here at the conference. That the connections that are made will result in partnerships that will yield real solutions to the problems that we're facing here in Pittsburgh and around the world.
Laura, talk to me about that point. Talk to me about this concept of making this almost like a progressional series of summits.
That's why we don't call it a conference. It isn't a conference. It is the opening salvo of an ongoing fight against hate with now a unified army of people. And it is structured very deliberately to be this gathering of individuals, as Mark described, this gathering of ideas. We're going to sort through the solutions that have been offered here. We're going to pick a finite number of them. We're going to organize working groups composed of people who were here, people who couldn't be here, people who have expressed an interest in being involved. We're going to work on those projects. And about a year from now, we're going to be on our feet, keeping our promise to this group and to everybody associated with the summit to deliver real change.
And think about the turnout we've had. More than 100 experts from around the country and around the world. Many of them making their first trip since the pandemic struck. paying their own way, wanting to be here, wanting to be a part of it. There's a kind of enthusiastic energy that has come from bringing people together that makes us very optimistic about the follow-through.
Mark, let me ask you this. You've talked about rule of law-based solutions. What do you mean by that?
Well, this country is founded in the rule of law, which in turn is grounded in respect for other people. And so to the extent that there are modifications that can be made, creative solutions that can be pursued within the framework of law, that's good for all of us. It is the law that holds our societies together, that reflects the values of civilization. So it's both aspirational and it is a tool.
You guys have mentioned to me that the Tree of Life tragedy was sort of the moving force. It's the element that brought this to life, if you will. I would like to hear from both of you what that tragedy, what effect that had on you to bring us to this point.
It made everything personal, because Mark and I both knew and loved people who died that day, and people who lost families that day, and people whose lives were changed forever that day. And so from that first moment, it was personal to us. And so part of what you've seen in this summit is our making sure that it was personal to everyone as well. And one of the things that some of the researchers have talked to me about while they're here is that in many ways, people who work in this field, who study the data, who spend their lives immersed in this work, have to distance themselves from what they're doing because it is very painful. It is very hard work
Shield
for
their
them
emotions,
to do.
you mean?
Exactly. Almost like a surgeon who works on the most difficult cases. You have to have some line of division emotionally so that you are not destroyed when your patient dies. And many of the researchers in this field face that same phenomenon. And so they distance themselves a little bit from the work. And what they have told both Mark and me throughout this is one of the most powerful things is that the personal stories of the victims, both from the Tree of Life tragedy, but also the many other victims who are here and have brought their powerful stories here to the summit, that has reminded them of what they do and why they do it, that it has energized them, that it has inspired them. And that has the reciprocal benefit when that word gets back to those victims who came here because they want their pain to matter. They want their pain to drive a difference in this world. We're seeing that happen here. And we're seeing these top researchers in the world thank us and thank those who brought their voices here for helping inspire them in the fight. That is the power of that in-person connection. And the conversations we've been hearing in the hallways, at the dinners have been just incredible. And I turned around at one point yesterday and I saw Tanya Gersh, who talked very movingly about being the victim of a white supremacist movement, embracing Chris Buckley, who was a white supremacist. And they were embracing outside this room where they had both brought their chapter of the fight against hate together into one room in one place. That's what the summit is all about.
What you're telling me is that human face is vital to both understanding and progression forward.
Absolutely.
I don't think there has ever been anything not involving a member of my family that has had the kind of emotional impact on me that the massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue had. For starters, it's just hard to imagine how human beings can be so cruel to other human beings. And then, I found myself saying, this happened in Pittsburgh. It happened in Squirrel Hill. It happened in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. It really does make everything very personal. And I think the natural reaction is to say, what can I do? How can I help? Is there a way that I can make a difference? And certainly this conference is a huge step in the direction of making a difference, not just for Pittsburgh, but worldwide. And as Laura has said, the reactions of the people who have been invited to participate have really been heartwarming. Heartwarming and mind expanding, because we're driven by emotion, but we want to structure solutions that will work.
Unfortunately, mass casualty events have become all too common now. But many communities don't respond the way Pittsburgh responded to the Tree of Life tragedy. Why?
Pittsburgh is a very unique community, very unique. It's one of the reasons that we've both made our lives here. And what we saw after the tragedy is emblematic of Pittsburgh. People from all walks of life, all faiths, all parts of Pittsburgh coming together, unified to look out for one another. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of Pittsburgh. It's one of the reasons that Pittsburgh was able to emerge from its post-industrial life to be reborn, to be a Renaissance city, to be the kind of place that it's known for being. But the goodness of people here, the kindness of people here, Mark referred to Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, and just the idea of being kind to people. We have a representative here as part of the summit who is the personal physician to the Dalai Lama. And above my desk is posted a quotation from a prior Dalai Lama who said, "Whenever possible, be kind, and it is always possible." And that to me captures the people of Pittsburgh. There is a kindness and a goodness and a willingness to roll up their sleeves and actually work for one another's good. And there's no better example of that than I know than Mark Nordenberg, who does it in every possible aspect of our civil life. But that's what Pittsburgh is to me.
Well, and we've made reference to Mr. Rogers' neighborhood as a sign of respect for the values that he advanced throughout his life. But it's interesting. It was the mayor's neighborhood. It was the county executive's neighborhood. It was the neighborhood of the executive editor of the major newspaper here in Pittsburgh. It's a few miles from my house, but I felt as if it was my neighborhood. And I think that Pittsburgh people have those feelings about the region, that if something happens here, it really has happened to all of us, and that has an impact. And we've been talking about the general reactions of the population, but there were specific examples that always will stand out for me. The young man who was the executive director of the Islamic Center was everywhere he should have been, saying everything exactly the way he should have been saying it. And basically he was saying, this isn't just the Jewish community's problem. This is our problem. And speaking to the Jewish community, you just tell us what you need and we'll be there. If it's food, we'll bring food. If it's security, we'll be there to provide security. I get teary-eyed even now thinking about the wonderful human reactions that we saw in the wake of this tragedy. And of course, it also extended to other groups like the professional sports teams. The Steelers were out and strongly speaking out against this. The Stronger Than Hate logo has the Steeler logo in it. This was something that really just touched the hearts of everybody in this region. And we all mourned in personal ways, whether we knew the people who were killed and wounded or not.
It's an amazing story.
And could I just add one quick thing to it? The people who stepped up didn't just step up to offer whatever you need, I'll do. They stepped up in a leadership capacity.
What do you mean?
The young man that Mark was talking about, Wasim Muhammad, he stepped up and he led the conversation of the community. He was, as Mark says, everywhere. Another young woman, Maggie Feinstein, stepped up as a therapist and helped this community heal and led organizations that helped this community heal. Mark and others in the community led other groups and other efforts that responded in other ways. So it wasn't people who were just passively offering help. It was people who stepped up, who said, what can I bring to the table in a leadership capacity? And they did. And there's a wonderful quote that says, don't wait for leaders. Be one each to the other every day. That's what this city did.
It's so impressive. Laura, Mark, thank you very much, and congrats on a very successful summit.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.